Thank you to say thank you to Dana and to the Justice Collaboratory for having me. And on every occasion, my project was so generously partially sponsored by the Art for Justice Foundation, and also the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. So I remain incredibly grateful to both. Early on the summer evening of August 1st, 2006, on a mournful New Haven, Connecticut side street, an elderly man from another town who just cashed checks worth nearly $2,000 was sitting in his cream-colored luxury car. A young stranger appeared at his window and killed the man with a single point-blank gunshot to the neck from a .45 caliber pistol. A .45 is a weapon so powerful, it's a handheld artillery piece. Few people are murderers, fewer still kill strangers. Far fewer, again, are capable of such an intimate execution. Another stranger, a 16-year-old boy who was blocks away at the time inside a pharmacy, went to prison for the shooting. Whatever muted outcry that followed in the city was soon undercut by the settled belief that these were the things that happened. The conditioned insignificance of the crime carried its significance. In three men, inextricably bound by violence, was the gone grandeur of cities, the end of new beginnings, and old, unresolved American history. Place matters in how we grow up. We are all products of our environments. New Haven, where I grew up, is a remarkably diverse city. It's also remarkably segregated. Mike Jefferson and I used to talk about this, and he grew up in the Bronx, and he said that the Bronx was too big for him to have a sense of geography, of landscape, of how things work in this country. And he said only when he came to New Haven for college could he see America, that it was like biology class in high school, that this was a microscope and the city functioned as such. And across my childhood, I could see that there were two New Havens, and then, and I'll tell you how I got to see that. Most kids know only their neighborhoods. I grew up in a rented floor of a two-family house with a single mom. She was a school teacher who filled our life with books, and she filled our life with anxiety because she was always worried about money. Part of that was that my dad was severely mentally ill, sometimes in the streets, and he lived in another city. So eventually, when I was in 7th grade, I went tuition-free to a New Haven private school. And every day when I went to that school, we'd cross town and I would pass the Winchester Repeating Arms Factory. And in the course of my years going to that school, you could see just from the employee entrances, the lines outside them, from the parking lots, from the number of empty buildings increasing, that something was going on and that it wasn't good. A way I got to know the city was by playing a lot of baseball here. You could see a lot because as you progress through the various age groups, you moved from different fields and different neighborhoods throughout the city. So I'd bike, as I ascended through the leagues, I would bike to different parts of the city. And I remember that when I was in 7th grade at my new school, I suddenly realized that all these kids had silver smiles, and I didn't understand what this was. And then I started hearing about orthodontists and braces, and I got it. And I remember a few weeks later, I was out on the field in Fairhaven, which was a working class neighborhood that way. And I remember staying in my position at shortstop, and a kid came up to second base and he smiled, and he had a silver smile too. And I remember thinking, looking around, because you know everybody who's on your team, who's on other teams, who comes to the games. He was among us the only one. A couple of years later, I was playing in Babe Ruth, which was at Bowen Field in Newhallville, and Newhallville is where the Winchester Repeating Arms Factory had been, and now it was really in bad decline. And I remember one day standing out at shortstop again and looking around me. And my mom may have had her struggles, but we didn't talk about these things, but it was my sense that they were nothing like some of the kids who I was playing with, that these were people, you know, whose families were struggling to provide for their basic needs. And I remember thinking about this and looking, and from the way the field was positioned, you could look across New Haven up over the hill and you could see the spires and towers of this university. And any kid who grows up, a towny kid like me who grows up in New Haven, you know, Yale seems like paradise for young people. And it is. I mean, this country has much to be proud of course, with its great universities. But it was also true that this juxtaposition for a kid was, for me anyway, was really troubling. And that it should be a short walk away from people who are living such remarkably different, in effect, childhoods was really confusing for me. And I remember very well my locution that day in my mind, standing out there in the field. I was just thinking, how can this be? And why should this be? Anyway, I grew up and I became a writer, and I eventually, over time, you could see that the problem that Mike and I talk about, two New Havens, two Connecticut's, two Americas persists. And so at a certain point, I came home and I decided I was going to do something in the way that a writer can to just describe what is on their mind. And what was on my mind was thinking about how a city shapes, childhoods, shapes experiences, shapes the way relationships form, and also whether there was any relationship between economic inequality and gun violence. But this is all an idea. It's not a story or a narrative. And that's what nonfiction writers, of course, depend upon. But I was thinking about this back in New Haven, and one day I got a call from a lawyer. The lawyer told me that he'd heard about what I was doing. It's a small city. These things like this happen. And he told me that he had a client he'd like to come and tell me about, me to come and he would tell me about him. So I went to his office one day, which was in an old New Haven house on the top floor. It was a Sunday. It was snowing. And I remember this lawyer started telling me about his client, who he said was a really good kid who had been arrested for a murder that he hadn't committed and had been sent to prison at age 16 for 38 years, and that he was now in his 8th year of prison, and that his name was Bobby, and that he'd heard about what I was doing, and that Bobby's predicament suggested many of the things he thought and revealed truths that spoke to what I was thinking about and what I was doing. That lawyer's name is Ken Rosenthal, and I'll just read you a tiny bit about him. Years later, thinking back to 2010, Ken Rosenthal could no longer remember how it was that he became Bobby's lawyer. Rosenthal was a wholehearted person, someone who occupied himself with legal projects so time-consuming, years of strenuous effort, that they rapidly became what he had always been doing and always would be doing. His moment-to-moment engagement in these cases was complete. He did not defer or avoid or postpone or procrastinate or run errands. When others temporized, he became impatient, might rail against these obstacles to his onward motion. For recreation, Rosenthal was a long-distance runner who at age 65 completed his 3rd marathon in 18 months. But more accurately, all of those running races, like his cases, were one single forever race. He didn't care about money. He didn't care about fame. He didn't care what he drove or ate or wore. He had no evident relationship to irons, dry cleaners, combs, fabric softener, or dinner time. When he submitted to family summer vacations in rural Maine, it was understood that he would pack law books, but not his swimsuit. And his days would be spent at the nearest library. Occasionally, there came a morning when he stayed away from the library. Then he could be found at the regional courthouse observing. To children's birthday parties, he brought his legal briefs that he was drafting, and he sat on the couch penciling improvements amid the hats and hooters. He almost always took on unwinnable cases, put in his all, and lost well more than 90% of them. But against opposing lawyers with the most fearsome reputations, sometimes he won. Rosenthal grew up on a Connecticut chicken farm. Neither of his parents had been to college. He attended Yale College, but withdrew during his junior year to register Black voters in Mississippi. Then he went west, circulating through the Chicago chapter of Students for Democratic Society, the free speech movement at the University of California, and picking plums amid the effort to organize California farm workers. After college, he collected eggs for his father, taught elementary school, and held a job at an unemployment office, which led him to law school at the University of Connecticut. There he prepared for exams by reducing courses into summaries that fit onto one tiny slip of paper. When Rosenthal joined study groups, a classmate observed, Ken didn't drink coffee, only hot water. Rosenthal was hired as a young commercial litigator at Wigan and Dana, an old line New Haven firm, where he had a walnut nameplate on the door. After 4 years before the mast, Rosenthal joined the public defender's office and was rarely seen by his children until he burned out and returned to Wigan and Dana. This established a career pattern in which Rosenthal overdevoted himself to the defense of the indigent until it became necessary to re-energize at a prominent firm where his wealthy clients at times became enraptured with their scruffy attorney. When invited to their summer houses, Rosenthal might show up in his year-round personal uniform of green wool hat and green wool sweater with pins emerging like cattails through the spacious holes at the breast. When his living room required a couch, he recovered one from the town dump. When the families of his daughter's New Haven public school friends had difficulties, Rosenthal acted as their lawyer free of charge. Once his children left home, Rosenthal became of counsel for a succession of firms, which asked him to take a few cases in exchange for overhead and otherwise allowed him to remain, he said, separate, a lone legal rider. The arrangement let him follow what he considered his calling, defending poor men accused of crimes, and his life shaped to his work.
Thank you, Nikki. I hope some of that gave you just a glimpse of the incredible texture in this book and the details and the extraordinary investigation and research that went into it, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But what you just described in reading that passage about Ken Rosenthal is a singular type of public interest lawyer. And one of the things that I think is exciting about this panel is that we're meeting lawyers both through Nikki's reporting and also through our direct voices from the panelists who are about to hear from, whose career paths are different maybe than the ones that we often hear about here at the law school, right? We hear a lot about public defender offices or civil rights organizations or national big nonprofits where one might work, but these are lawyers who are doing the work of justice in a very different model. And that's one of the things I think is really exciting about this panel. So with that, I'm going to ask Emma and Michael to share your public interest lawyering trajectories with us and tell us a little bit about the work you're currently doing, your through line, how you got there since law school, and also whether you've been surprised by any twists and turns in your career that you didn't expect. I certainly did not envision myself sitting here when I was in law school. So I imagine you all might be, maybe have some of the same, maybe you knew right away, maybe you were clairvoyant, but it would be great to hear from you on those fronts. And maybe I'll ask Michael to start us off and then Emma.
Thank you, Professor Gahara, and thank you, Dana and the JC for having me. I want to preface my comments by talking a little bit about Nick's book. The book was a fantastic read, just to echo the sentiments of Professor Gahara. There's so many lessons in the book and how it was written, the history lessons in the book where Nick talks about slavery in Connecticut. He talks about the history of Black people in Connecticut and New Haven and the history of New Hallville. And I think one of the things that stood out for me in the book was how he humanized his characters. Pete, the victim, the villain, Major, and another victim, Bobby. And that's very important if you go into public interest law. Particularly in the courts in the state of Connecticut. I do a lot of criminal defense work. And I just think it's important for folks to understand that in terms of humanizing your client, particularly if they're people of color. I represent a great many people of color, primarily Black folks throughout the state. I've been all over the state. And I feel I have to humanize my clients, given the racial dynamics in this state. It's much easier for me, I find, I've been doing this for quite some time, to represent whites in the criminal justice system. I had a client, he was an English teacher in one of the local high schools, came home from work one day and there was an African-American male in his cul-de-sac and the guy busted a bottle and created a mess in the cul-de-sac, and my client is a white man, confronted him, and there was some words exchanged. My guy pulled out a gun, allegedly, and pointed it at the Black man's genitals. The Black guy runs off to get the police, and the police came, and my guy didn't have the gun on him, but he had bullets matching the description of the gun, and he was arrested. He called me up, and I went into court. I explained the situation to the prosecutor, who happened to be white, and they dismissed the case right out of hand. And I was shocked. I said, wow, it's just that easy, huh? You know, I mean, this was my client. I was happy, don't get me wrong. But it was shocking to me, because if the shoe was on the other foot, I'm sure they would have taken my a Black client through the ringer. I recall another case in which there was a white female in Guilford, young woman, college age, was in school out in California, picked up a big drug charge. And her father came to me and said, Mike, I need your help on this thing. And I said, well, you know, tell her to send me her transcript and her photo ID, but I want it in color. She was blonde. And because I knew it would work in the court system. And so I had the ID, and he was like, why would you want her driver's license in color, Mike? I said, let me do my job. And I brought it into the prosecutor's office, and boom, there it was. Yeah, Mike, we all do dumb things when we're young. The case was dismissed. So it's with Black clients, I find that I have to humanize my clients. I have to talk about their ambitions. I have to talk about their dreams. I have to talk about their family lives and their children. I have to make them human in the eyes of the justice system. This is powerful stuff that I'm talking about. It's real. Race matters in the courts. And folks shouldn't forget that if you choose to go into that line of work. I think the other thing that's important, and Professor, I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but I just think it's important that I share this, is that we all have to unlearn. We undergo a serious brainwashing in this country. We're all socialized, you know, men are socialized to harbor sentiments that can be construed as sexist in nature. When it comes to women, we're just brainwashed like that. And it's a process of unlearning that makes us whole and not resisting, and to owning those biases. You know, Blacks are socialized to hate ourselves, and it's a process of unlearning. I don't care, you know, you can be the most radical Black person alive. It's you can't escape the socialization process in this country that teaches us how to think about ourselves and how to think about others. And I think whites are socialized to harbor sentiments that can be construed as racist in nature, and have to unlearn. And we have to ask ourselves, why wouldn't we be this way if we're socialized? A friend of mine, we do this presentation called Rooting for Tarzan, the socialization of Blacks and whites in American society. You can look it up on the web. It's a powerful presentation, and you know, it's based on the whole concept of how my generation grew up watching reruns of Tarzan, the Johnny Weissmuller movies, and how you know, the young people always want to be the hero. You know, we want to identify with Tarzan, but he's white, I'm Black. So we develop, and the savages, of course, the subjugated individuals are Black, and we don't want to be associated with the savages, the natives. And so we developed this false sense of inferiority, and whites developed this false sense of superiority. And it's a question of unlearning. And I just think that is something that we cannot be afraid to do. We can't be embarrassed about. And I think at the end, it's liberating when you can stand in front of a group and own it, you know, whether it's your sexism, whether it's your racism, or whether it's your self-hatred. I do some civil rights cases. Got a case now is going through federal court. Chulo Vega out of Weathersfield, 18 years old, was shot point blank by an officer in Weathersfield. Black cop shot him on a motor vehicle stop. And it's just, I need not tell you what that does to a family. It destroys a family. And this prosecutor got a lot of pressure from law enforcement and not to prosecute, and they didn't pursue the charges, and the cop. So we have to pursue it civilly, and we don't know how that's going to turn out because, and I guess Emma could tell you way more than I can about summary judgments and how, you know, folks circumvent justice by having those summary judgments granted. Of course, there's an ongoing case now with Randy Cox. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that case, the young man who was paralyzed here in New Haven due to the negligence, I would add, of the police. And I'm dealing with another case now in Plainfield. Hakeem Thompson, this Black male was chased by the police officer, state trooper, never turned on his headlights, just pursued him off the highway onto Lathrop Road, a long road. And my guy hit a guardrail and violently crashed the car. And we could see it based on, there was an Amazon distribution center, and we could see the entire accident. And the police officer, the state trooper, pulls up behind him, crawls through the intersection, stares at, we can see it all on, and then drives off. Never called the crash in. This young man was left in his car in a culvert, a ditch, 45 minutes before a passerby saw him laying there and called the cops. He was airlifted. He's right now in a coma, stage 3 brain trauma. And the police office and the state police have been very reluctant to provide us with the metadata that we need to pursue this case, but we are in fact pursuing it. So those are 3 cases that we're pursuing. I want to just give Emma opportunity to talk, and then I can entertain whatever questions that you have. I have a lot more to say about some of these things.
That sounds great. I just want to make a fine point, because when I was in law school, I don't know that this would have occurred to me. So I just want to speak to the students or lay people out there. Another point, besides the fact that we often hear about, you know, big organizations or fancy public defender offices, is that we also don't think about the ways in which civil lawyers advance the causes of criminal justice. And that's something that Michael and Emma have in common. So I'm glad that you mentioned this, Michael, that your civil work, because Emma, you're working at a firm where this is exactly the mission. And so I'd love for you to, I'm sure you're planning to talk about that, but that's a point, right? You can be a civil lawyer and still do work on behalf of people who've been wronged by the criminal justice system.
Thanks. That is exactly the focus of the work that I do. So my name's Emma Freudenberger, and I'm a partner at a private public interest law firm called Neufeld, Shack and Bresson. We're a small law firm, and all that we do are civil rights cases. And so, like, in many ways, my work is all about what happens next, like what happens after these horrifying, traumatic interactions with law enforcement, with corrections officers, after somebody has been wrongly convicted and done the incredibly hard and heroic work of fighting their way out of prison, notwithstanding being innocent. And what happens after somebody is murdered by police officers? How can you kind of use the civil system in order to both learn lessons and hopefully instill some measure of accountability among law enforcement? There's this, so most of what I do on a practical level is civil wrongful conviction cases, meaning 1983 suits on behalf of people like Bobby who've been exonerated. And we also do some shooting cases, although they are getting more and more difficult because of the kind of perversions in the law that Michael was referring to. I think that what I have to kind of add to the conversation is less about my particular path. I came to law school wanting to do policy work, thinking that these criminal justice policy was the way that I could try to do something to chip away at these like really glaringly racist and depraved systems that at least where I am from and grew up, nobody was talking about. And I had a professor in law school who said, well, if you're not going to even try practicing, you shouldn't be here. Go just try it out and find out that whether or not you like it. And so I came to my current firm as a summer associate, thinking I would just check that box. And it was pretty transformative for me to represent individual clients. I did it for, I think, 10 weeks, and I worked on one big case at a really pivotal moment preparing for trial. And I felt like this was something that I could see doing for my entire career, and came back to my same firm. And I think the thing that surprised me the most about my own career is just that I've been in one place for most of it, and unless things go horribly wrong, will be at one firm for the rest of my career. But what I wanted to say, and what I think I can add, is all of my work is premised on this idea that money speaks incredibly loudly in our society, and that the actual fact of huge civil judgments will cause people who otherwise are not motivated to make changes in the spaces in which they use power to wake up and do so. And that's the fundamental idea behind these damages cases. That said, although I believe that is unfortunately true, and I believe that this is an important piece of the work, an important way that civil discovery, which is perversely, entitles you to vastly more information than you get on the criminal side of things, is beneficial in that way. I think the thing that is the most powerful about doing individual damages cases is actually the stories that come out of them. And for, one of the remarkable things to me in reading this book is that every client who I represent in a wrongful conviction case has a story to tell that I think is as powerful as Bobby's story about places, about systems, about people, and the different and about the consequences of the system that I feel conflicted about working within. And the difference is that most stories don't have a narrator who's as gifted and committed and able to really dive in and do, tell their stories in the honest and responsible and just incredibly impressive way that Nikki has with this book. And I think, we're always talking at my law firm about how we can kind of use our clients' stories and use the narratives that come out of these cases to educate the people who have the potential to really make change. And I don't know the answer to that. I just know that reading this book, I was incredibly grateful that somebody has taken the amount of time and care to pull out these profound ideas from this really terrible and very common tragedy.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to circle back to you for a second, Michael, because I really would like the students to hear how you ended up working in such an amazing practice on your own. And if you could tell us a little bit about, the benefits and challenges of being in solo practice as a public interest lawyer of the sort you've described.
Sure, and I apologize for not addressing it earlier, but yeah, my mom was a community organizer and a social worker. My father was a police officer in New York City for 20 years. They both have passed, but they transferred certain things to me that I appreciate. My mom wanted me to become a doctor, and my father wanted me to become a cop, and I disappointed both of them by becoming a criminal defense attorney. but so when I graduated, I didn't really know what I wanted to do in terms of the law. So I just started visiting, different courthouses on the civil side and the criminal side. I recall a judge, she said, Mike, why don't you come over and check out, family law, which I was interested in because I was a juvenile probation officer at one time. So I went over and to check out the family law side of things. And there was this case going on, Dana, where there was just a couple, it was a divorce matter, and the couple was, through their attorneys, were going at it over a clock. And I mean, they were going at it. I just couldn't even understand it. And, and I said, these people once loved each other, and they were fighting over a clock. And the judge, she saw my face, and she told the marshal, and it was a break in the session. She said, tell Mike to come back here. So I go back there, and she said, you still want to do this sort of stuff, Mike? And I said, I don't know. I don't think so. So she said, you might want to take a walk across the street. And so I walked across the street, Miriam, and that's 121 Elm Street. I'm talking about 235 Church Street. That's civil and the high court for crim. And 121 Elm is the people's court for primarily for low-level crimes and what have you. Where most of the crimes are prosecuted in this geographical area. And I jumped right in, and it was the public defenders and the prosecutors who taught me the nuances of the law. I did not work for anyone. I never wanted to work for anyone, because I know my personality. And so I just jumped right in, and they just, taught me what I know, and I just got better at it. It took about 5 years to really get it, but and that's how I got onto this path.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to lose some students to class, so let's just keep the conversation going and not sweat it. And anyone who didn't get a book, grab one. Okay, so well, those of us who represent people who are either in the criminal legal system wrongfully or not wrongfully. I mean, maybe they've been convicted of something that they actually did participate in. Nevertheless, we know that reentry is a really tough point for people, right? That's just, getting out of prison is just the beginning of the challenges. So I'm hoping that each of you, maybe we'll start with Emma this time, we're starting with Nikki. Nikki's going to do a little reading, right, to describe Bobby's reentry challenge. And then we're going to go to Emma and Michael to tell us a little bit about how that plays out in their practices.
I think at this point, unless most sentient Americans are aware of mass incarceration, but in my experience anyway, quite a number of people don't know that inevitably mass incarceration leads to mass reentry, which is what happens when you leave. And most people who are in prison eventually will leave. What it takes to survive in prison is different from what it takes out here. It's an unusual place, defined as the people who I spoke with who spent time there would say. They would always emphasize stress, tedium, and regret. And they would also emphasize how prisons are full of impoverished people. So many people will tell you that prison ruins people, and Bobby certainly would be one of them. One of the things that happens is that the experience comes to define you when you leave, and that you emerge with a scarlet P on your forehead, an invisible scarlet P. And Bobby, who was innocent and had been exonerated, who emerged from prison, there are lots of people who are lawyers and who specialize in reentry who will make lists of the things that people can expect, the hardships, the difficulties, the adversities that people who leave prison can expect to occur. And they have to do with health, with job opportunity, and many other things. These are pretty long lists. And one of the things I noticed about Bobby, innocent Bobby, wrongfully convicted Bobby, is that he seemed to check every box. And so in this way, he's a really good subject because he becomes a reentry everyman. And the unfairness of his predicament did not have anything to do with what came afterwards. So I'm just going to read you a little passage about what part of his reentry experience. You need to know a couple of things for this. One thing you need to know is that I spent a year in a federal reentry court in New Haven, just watching. And so this is mentioned. One of the things you should also think about is that people's experience before they go to prison, they arrive at a certain age. In other words, Bobby was 16. When they emerge, their experience of this exterior world, if we can call it that, is that they have only 16 years. So it would be typical that people who came out of prison are 16 and lived experience of the external world might still have some of the same desires and hopes that they had when they left, that those might be dangling there for them. Bobby had an alleged co-defendant whose name was Kwame. He went to prison. He was locked up for his 15th and 16th birthdays, and he's someone who everyone says was ruined by that experience. Bobby and Kwame used to hang out at a little convenience store in New Hallville, their neighborhood, which was known as the 2-4 because it was open 24 hours a day at a certain point. Bobby was incarcerated at the Cheshire prison, which is sometimes called Big Cheshire, and one of the police officers who interrogated him, his name was Clarence Willoughby. When Bobby was a kid, he too rode his bicycle all over New Haven, and in that persona, he refers to himself always as a traveler, which I love. On any day when Bobby could again be a traveler, moving around, interacting with people, he was at his most optimistic. He wanted his life permanently to open up. Across the difficult first year after prison, the former boy on a bike now made earning his driver's license his top priority. Back when Bobby turned 16, his driver's license wasn't for him a defining American moment or even on his mind. Somebody could always come and get you, he said, or buses, or your friend's mom or dad, we'd all pile in. Growing up in a disenfranchised community, many 16-year-olds from New Hallville didn't pursue their licenses. Glenn Worthy, the New Hallville native who was principal at Hill House High School, said, when it comes up with kids, they say, hush, Mr. Worthy, I don't want to talk about that now. Mostly they can't afford it. Beyond the hundreds of dollars it costs to become licensed, many New Hallville families own no vehicle, making it impossible to secure a car in which to learn to drive, and then to reach the Department of Motor Vehicles, which was miles away out in Hamden. There was also the reluctance to fail, sometimes felt by kids who'd already endured many defeats. Bobby's friend Shay described getting a license as extra stuff. Shay had been 21 and away at college when she finally got hers. She said that for New Hallville kids, there was no driver's ed class offered at Hill House High School and no way of getting to the high school in Hamden where such courses were held. Perhaps the license wasn't even necessary. Bobby's mother and father hadn't, so far as he knew, ever had licenses. A lot of people where I'm from ride around without licenses, Bobby said. This was a practice known to many in New Hallville as riding or driving dirty. Dirty was versatile slang with many applications. Shay said that everybody she knew growing up was dirty somehow, suspended license, no insurance, car taxes. Let my insurance lapse because it was either phone bill or insurance, food or insurance. Which would you rather pay? Car insurance? That was let me pray. This is a lot of people, and you have to drive to make money at your job, so you take a chance. Bobby was determined. He talked about the driver's license as his golden ticket, said to him, it means the world because when I have my license, I can get a job outside New Haven where it's safer. Bobby's desire was to be upstanding, not someone who resorted to driving dirty, who remained unlicensed because he'd been to prison. He thought having the license would now finally make him feel liberated. Bobby's cousin Koya helped him get the formal process started with a learner's permit. She and Granddad gave him a few driving lessons, and then Shay took over. They had glorious times together out on the road. Shay loved to drive, and he did too. 4 months after his release from prison, Shay helped Bobby enroll in an 8-hour accredited course on safe driving practices, where he sat in the back row of the classroom behind all the teenagers and enjoyed learning about the potential on-road dangers of a messy car, about how passenger weight distribution affects turning radius. After completing the course came the qualifying tests, first written, then rode. Bobby went to the DMV in Hamden to take his written examination, and by the time he got to the DMV, he was visibly shaking. The atmosphere at the squat brick DMV building didn't help. With its uniformed guards, stale smell, the dulled faces of all the people standing by, the DMV could have been a correctional institution. Bobby began his test, and soon a question about skids slid him so far off course that he became rattled, rushed through the remaining questions just so he could get out of that room, get out of that building. He failed the test by 1 point. Afterwards, he could barely speak. He was so crushed. The next available test date in Bobby's part of the state was at the Cheshire DMV in mid-April. He could have waited a few days more and gone to a closer Connecticut town, one where he hadn't been incarcerated, but he was eager to defeat the test. And besides, Bobby felt no need to avoid Cheshire. His time there was someone else's mistake. He began studying the manual, he said, hard. On his second written test day, Bobby arrived at a coffee shop in Cheshire 3 hours before his appointment time, and he prepared like an athlete. He hydrated with water, he ate a banana, and he limbered up with practice tests. He wanted a victory in Cheshire. He'd all but memorized the manual, but these practice tests asked for knowledge of the specifics of tire alignment and teen curfews, areas outside the manual's coverage. What was up with these non-manual related questions? When Bobby answered one incorrectly, he jumped up, nearly knocking the table over. On the way to the DMV, Bobby passed the prison. The Cheshire DMV was a much smaller building than Hamden and had the hospitable ambiance of a National Park Welcome Center. As he went in, Bobby was making nervous jokes and saying, "I'm not nervous. I'm not failing. I got this." His dark 26-year-old face contrasted with the rosy white teenagers who were arriving with their parents for the test. As the woman at the front desk signed him in, she took a practice glance and said, "You'll do fine." Then she advised Bobby, "Take your time." Once registered, Bobby disappeared down a hallway. 40 minutes later, he emerged, arms raised, roaring, high-fiving, cheesing. His test score had been nearly perfect. There had been several questions identical to those on the practice test. It seemed like all the answers were popping out, he said, speaking in a joyous rush. "I'm souped, I'm turned, I'm ecstatic, I'm so souped." From the car, he made calls, left voice messages. Passing the prison, he brought up Detective Willoughby. "I don't bear him any grudges," Bobby said. "It's not in my heart to do that. People can do wrong things, and it doesn't make me hate them. I'm just letting people be who they are." Bobby would have to wait 3 months before taking his road test in mid-July. Deferring his wishes, he knew how to do. And he was so steadfast about license preparation, it seemed worrisome to think what would happen when there was no longer the upcoming road test to organize his life. He enjoyed practicing with Shay, she warning, "It's no more smooth sailing church drivers out there today, Bobby. Don't let anybody break your flow," which was not to say Bobby wanted the process to last. "I can taste it," he said. "When I pass, I'm going to cry. You'll see tears." The day before the road test in July 2016, Bobby drove around the city, practicing what he judged were his weaknesses. He reminded himself to check his mirrors every 5 minutes, to note the speed limit, to place his hands 6 hours apart on the wheel. Near the 24-hour store, he said, "We were sitting there when they pulled me off the porch and arrested me. It was raining." Then he beeped a greeting explaining that was Kwame and them. Kwame's group was out there every day. Bobby drove so well you could forget he was practicing. Then, when he made a small error, forgetting to signal for a lane change, his hands trembled from wanting something so much. The next day, the weather was hot, bright, and clear. After all the waiting, everything happened very fast. A large graying white man in sunglasses, a blue agency issue polo shirt, and blue khakis approached Bobby. The man looked like a country boy state trooper, and it turned out Bobby's examiner was a retired suburban police officer. He asked Bobby to get into the driver's seat, to turn on the car's ignition, to use his turn indicators, first the right, then the left, to press the brake pedal. As the car crept out of the parking lot, Bobby signaled left, and something in the air lifted.
Emma, I'm sure that, driver's licenses and all sorts of basic needs for living as an adult are challenges for your clients. And I'm wondering if you'll tell us a little bit about some of the challenges they encounter after they're exonerated.
Can't believe you're asking me to follow that passage up. That part, the amount of Nikki's book that talks about the import of cars and freedom and challenges and barriers resonated with my own experience, not just because I failed my driving test 3 times, but because I find that it does occupy a lot of space in conversations with my own clients. And I think it may be because of all of the things that are pointed out in the book about prisons and car culture and the privilege associated with driving freely. But in particular, while I was doing Bobby's civil case, I had another client who had a strikingly similar case. He had been arrested, wrongly convicted, almost the exact same age as Bobby, in the same year as Bobby, coincidentally done the same amount of time as Bobby, a man named Devontae Sanford from Detroit. And Bobby's case and Devontae's case happened to be both false confession cases, and they were happening on this sort of parallel timing track. So I was taking depositions, sort of the similar depositions at the similar stages of cases. And they couldn't be two more different men. I kind of think of them as kids. And I think there was a reference to this in the book, because although they're such different people who had this experience in two different places in common, but otherwise really have just completely different temperaments, personalities, outlooks. They had some things in common, and one of them was a fixation with driving and getting and just a lot of different problems associated with their licenses and interactions with law enforcement around driving. But I think the thing that's like the most striking about these two cases, and I was seeing in parallel at that time, is this idea that you're emotionally stunted at the age where you go into prison. And I've seen that with other people who it's very stark when people go in as a teenager and come out after, 15 or 20 years, and suddenly you're two ages at one time. And it's really evident. And I also noticed that kind of in myself as a lawyer representing these two people and trying to think about agency and storytelling and responsibility and respect and all of those things. And yet at the end of the day, after every in-person interaction I was having with both of these two clients, I would feel like I just wanted to hug them and parent them. And that is definitely I think the fact that you can't age because you can't develop in all of and mature in all the emotional ways that we all need to moving through the world, because you're just trapped and in this, perverse and very environment where you have to just be constantly vigilant, constantly trying to survive, constantly around noise and physically uncomfortable and never able to let your guard down and all of these ways. And then it's just so perverse that you take people and you put them somewhere where they can't grow and develop, and they experience all of this trauma during that time, and then take them out and provide no support, and they're just supposed to go around living life. I mean, and life is hard, even if you have all the privileges in the world. Day-to-day life is hard and challenging, and you don't have an opportunity to develop those skills, and you're saddled with all this trauma. And I think, and look, I'm no expert in any of this, but I think when you're talking about somebody who is innocent, who has just been targeted for reasons that no one understands, and is in this situation, like, you're also trying to understand that trauma and work through it. I just don't really know how anyone's expected to do it. So there are all of these practical issues, getting an ID, figuring out how to get a job, etc. But I think the bigger picture macro issues are like so insurmountable that even with the best help and the best social workers and the best family support, I don't know anyone who hasn't, I certainly haven't represented anybody who has not really profoundly struggled, and who unfortunately, I don't think it's an experience that you can heal from.
I'm just going to interject one quick thing, because I actually have a teenager who went through the driver's license process recently, and it was a bear. So just for anyone, even just with someone with resources, I understand there are all these safety concerns. And so they require you to have all these hours of practice driving before you can get your license. And so, and I get it. As a parent of a driver, I'm glad that there are those things, but this is the consequence, right? If you are in poverty and you don't have a car, or you don't have a licensed driver in your house, and it costs a lot of money, it is very challenging just to get that very basic, tool that you need to get a job. Connecticut does not have a good infrastructure for public transportation, right? So how are you going to get to work? And I want to underscore that one of the brilliant things about Nikki's book is the way in which it nests individual experience into these systemic issues and provides the just beautiful detail. You know, he got his license, my son, at the Cheshire, and it's exactly what you described. It's a national park center. That's exactly what it looks like. And it's just these brilliant, and we're going to get to the details in a second, because the next series of questions is about how you did that texture in the book. But Michael, please share with us your experiences around your clients' challenges with reentry.
Yeah, because of the experience that Bobby went through, I do a lot in trying to prevent it from happening. You know, that's a huge challenge, keeping people from going to jail. I have a case down tomorrow, a young man, 18 years old, was caught carrying a gun. I want to get on a bullhorn and just ride around New Haven, you know, telling the young people to leave the guns alone. It's a mandatory 1 year. And if you're a convicted felon or you have a domestic in your history, it's a criminal possession of a firearm with a mandatory 2 years, and the federal government can come in and take over the case and send you to prison. They have truth in sentencing with the feds, which means whatever time they give you, you're doing every bit of it. And I have a lot of experience working with folks who come home from prison. And the real issue is the issue of trust, and they're so disillusioned and they're angry with society, particularly those who were wrongfully convicted, just very, very angry, and rightfully so. And they're angry with their tormentors, those who put them away. You know, I reading Nick's book, I just asked myself time and time again, what kind of people are these? You know, what God do you pray to throw somebody's life away like that, to do that to someone just to, you know, hang a pelt on the wall? It's just incredible to me that you have individuals out there with a license and a gun, a badge, you know, to take a person's life and liberty at will. And, you know, society remains, for the most part, silent about it. And these folks they're destroyed. You know, when they go in, they're just not the same people when they come out. And I have many conversations with these individuals, and you know, transportation, housing, employment, those are key issues. As a member of the Social Equity Council, with this rollout of the adult cannabis business, you know, we're now in the phase of community reinvestment. And one of the things we made a point to do is make reentry the pilot part of that piece, because that's the key. You know, our communities were decimated by the war on drugs. Just completely destroyed. Families were destroyed. I mean, and folks don't understand that. You have a lot of these individuals who may have children before they went in, and you know, and they don't even know their children. You know, children don't know them, and you know, it's something that you know, Emma stole most of my thunder because she just eloquently laid it out. I mean, in terms of what you're facing as a person, to regain that trust, to relive and to recapture what you lost. It's you know, I can't even fathom it. You know, I'll let you go on to your next question. I think we've exhausted it. You know.
Yeah, no, it really is unfathomable. Some of my clinic students, one of whom is here, have been working with me on a case in which our client has been incarcerated for 30 years on Alabama's death row for a crime he did not commit. And he's been exonerated by DNA evidence, and he's still not released from prison because of the way that, you know, the criminal justice system winds its way, and the state's obsession with finality of convictions, even in the face of evidence that proves our client didn't do it. And I think about the day I pray that we get to walk him out of prison. And I think about the day that we are going to have to help him reintegrate. He went in when he was in his late teens or early 20s, and is going to come out in his 50s. And so it's just mind-boggling what he's going to have to overcome to re-enter. And I also think about this too. I mean, Emma, the work you do, it's, you know, I see these posts on social media from the Innocence Project or other organizations, and people are like congratulating their clients, you know, because they got out. And I think to myself, or people are congratulating people online, and I think to myself, there's nothing like this. It's a travesty. And yet we congratulate people for the for the measure of justice that they get delayed, right? If they're lucky to ever see the light of day. And it really is just one of those paradoxes, I think, of the work. Do you want to?
I think that's true. Absolutely. It's congratulations is definitely not apt, but we say it because we feel like we have to acknowledge this. And I think there's also a real issue that I see connected with like the innocence movement. And it's kind of paradoxical because on the one hand, I think individual stories and community and coming together collectively are incredibly important, and there are exonerees who are doing amazing work that I couldn't support more. And at the same time, there's this public celebration and it's this newsworthy kind of media hype when people get out of prison. And every time it's like, I tend to start working with someone within, say, a month or two after they get out of prison, when there's still a lot of attention being focused on the exoneration. And then it's like these cycles that people go through, and it is predictable. And it's just, I also think it's harmful because it's like false enthusiasm around something that's going to be incredibly hard. And really, I think the only appropriate thing to say is like, I mean, I don't know what the appropriate thing to say is, but it's more along the lines of, thank God, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Like, what can I do? Then congratulations, you've won your freedom. You haven't won anything. And it feels to me like people are in for more stages of hard. And that sounds more pessimistic than how I actually feel or think it is. But I just, whatever we have is not adequate and not doing the trick.
This is reminding me of the day that Bobby was released, and everything you're saying is so true, and the mixed and sort of confusion of feelings that people had was really, to me, powerful. And I remember I was allowed to go and watch Ken, his lawyer, tell him, because the corrections commissioner at the time was like so many people, was really generous to me and was interested in what I was doing. And so he arranged for me to be able, on short notice, because it came through, and then obviously they were going to let Bobby know as quickly as possible. So I went to, Ken told me to meet him at a coffee shop near Cheshire Prison. And one of the things I noticed was that Ken didn't seem to be in any hurry to tell Bobby, which I thought was perverse. Like, this person, I mean, who deserved to know more quickly? And I eventually asked him, and he said that he needed to be in a place where he could feel optimistic for Bobby, because he knew that what was coming was not something that was deserved, but not something that should be congratulated for, just as Emma said, and that it was going to be hard. And he wanted to be in a place where he could be optimistic for Bobby. So then shortly after that, we finally went. And as Bobby was taking in the news, it was really complicated. And what he was talking about was how much he would miss the people who'd been good to him while he was in prison. And he needed to start disentangling himself from people who had supported him through an incredibly hard time. So the complexity, I could tell you much more about it, but the complexity of it is really just what I want to say, which is that there were so many different emotions, and congratulations seemed to be something that began as the preliminary expected, message to deliver, but it quickly devolved into just the complexity and the burdens and the sorrows of the moment. So
I also want to just mention that there are two bills that are pending right now in the state legislature that are relevant to exactly what we're talking about. One of them has to do with outlawing deceptive interrogation tactics against children, against young people. So that's obviously at the heart of this book and critical. And also meaning that police won't be allowed to lie to suspects who are juveniles in order to extract confessions from them, which is exactly what happened to Bobby. And also an ID bill that would make it much easier, or require, I believe, the state to provide people leaving incarceration with a valid ID, or make it easier for them to obtain one. So I just want to mention that. All right, Nikki, this book, I mean, all of you who've heard these readings can now appreciate the texture and the painstaking work that went into this book. I learned after I read it that Nikki spent 1 year attending reentry court at the federal courthouse here, going every week to a group where people who are returning from federal incarceration receive support and fellowship and resources from the federal court system. And that's just one tiny sliver of the massive investigation that went into assembling this narrative. And my students who are in the room and those who aren't know that one of the biggest techniques that we learn is how do we, to go back to Michael's point, in order to humanize people, you have to have the details, right? You have to have you have to have the grain, and we have to nest it in the kind of history and social science that you've done here. So it's the individual, and then it's the details about the context too. And I really, one of the things that moved me so much about the book is how well you did that. And I'm really interested in your sharing with our entire group here, how you went about the investigation, what you prioritize. Obviously you went to sources that were written. You did many oral interviews, and personally showed up many times. So I'm really interested in hearing about that. And then we're going to transition to one last question about how we take care of ourselves and open it up to audience Q&A.
I guess I just have to say that I've never had people say so many nice things to me in public before, and it's a little embarrassing. And I'm so appreciative to you all. I think one of the things that all three of these people who I spent a lot of time with while I was writing the book, and they were so generous about helping me work through the many dilemmas and problems and things that I just didn't know that I felt I needed to know. And I think it should be clear to all of you right now that what distinguishes each of them is what good and sensitive listeners they are. And that's what I think any narrative nonfiction writer would aspire to. I felt like they're each, in their legal work, all three of these people are advocates, and my job was to be neutral, was to find the truth, to discover, and to, in my way, represent everybody's point of view, even people who I felt privately had done things that, to me were horrible things to do, but I was still responsible for them. So narrative nonfiction writers are like most novelists in that we relate the experiences of other people. And for me, I always went back to what two of my very favorite writers would say, and I'll just about this, and I'll read them to you. One is James Baldwin, who wrote, "If one really wishes to know how justice is administered in a country, one does not question the policemen, the lawyers, the judges, or the protected members of the middle class. One goes to the unprotected." And I took that very seriously as a kind of charge. And then in this way, I was following the example of Virginia Woolf, who's one of those writers who, when I was a kid growing up, I was so lucky to have a mom who filled our house with books, and there was a lot of Virginia Woolf around. And this is one of the things that she says about her work, that she should face the effect of other existences, grapple with the mechanism of external things, report the speeches of men and women who existed independently of herself. So yeah, I went to reentry court, which met every 2 weeks. And one of the things I noticed in reentry court was how many people were assembled there to help these, and they were all men, these men who had been recently released from federal prison, and how much everybody wanted them to succeed, and really what they were up against in their attempts to succeed, which was sort of, it was like could be if you had negative bumper stickers, it would be one that would say, "You fucked up, fix yourself." And these were people who, because of where they'd been and whatever got them there, were in the least position to do that. And to me, I couldn't just help but notice over time, again and again, how counterintuitive it was, that the punishment should have been, in my mind anyway, because writers can't help but have opinions, is that, being taken away from your life and put somewhere where you can't leave, that should have been the punishment. And I did not, for the life of me, it made no sense to me why people who were sent to such a place weren't then primed for reentry. And it wasn't happening in most places. There are exceptions, but it typically isn't happening. I would think about that over and over sitting in that courtroom, in the reentry courtroom. my job really, as I saw it, was there are many people in this book, but I was trying to describe the experience of a neighborhood over time, that the main character should not be Bobby, should not be Ken, but should be the neighborhood. And in that way, I wanted as many voices as possible to emerge from the book. And so I was trying to, in creating this portrait, I was trying to hear from as many people with as many individuals with differing points of view on life and how things were day to day as I could. So I over 8 years, I interviewed more than 500 people. And in doing that, I always was, someone would suggest somebody else to talk with, and they would get in touch, and they would say, you could talk to this person. And my procedure was always a version of what I maybe did at the beginning of this, was to tell a little bit about myself. And then I always prepare my question in advance, and I create an order, which I hope builds some level of rapport, and ask my questions. But it feels always really important to me when you're writing about anything, you shouldn't make mistakes, and you don't want to make mistakes. But I felt that in writing about poverty and in writing about inequality, these things existed in part because people just don't want to pay attention. They don't want to notice. And it would be so easy for them not to notice a book in this respect. And one way not to notice would be, there would be something wrong. And I was also well aware when the neighborhood is largely African-American. And here I was, a white guy coming and talking with people. And I knew that, that it was inevitable that just in the way that Mike said, that even though I wouldn't want to, that there might be misunderstandings or mistakes. But with literally every person, the 40 police officers I interviewed, the judges, the lawyers, the social workers, the activists, just everyone, I did the same thing, which is I came to the end of the interview and I would say, so, this project was really important to me. And I said, I don't want to make mistakes, and there's so much opportunity. Is there anything that I've said to you, whether tone or fact, where you're worried that I'm going to make mistakes? Do you have any concerns? I was kind of crazy for checking myself for feedback. And for me, I guess that really was, if I think of the signal thing about research, it's so easy not to be a good listener. And I tried as hard as I could to become a better listener, a more subtle and acute and supple listener. And I think if I have any experience of this, it's just that the way you avoid generalization, the way you avoid making mistakes because you don't have the information, is to listen better, to wait, to really hear. And I feel as though if I had any research accomplishment over those 8 years, I hope it's that I became a better, more acute and sensitive listener.
Thank you so much. Okay, my last question for our panel, really, it's something that, I think, Nikki, I think the first question I asked you after I read the book was, how did you take care of yourself? This book hurts to read. It really hurts. And I know it must have hurt a lot to be immersed in this, for close to a decade, and then to write it and grapple with its aftermath. And it hurts. The lawyering that we do hurts. It's painful. Our clients are the center, and their pain is different, very different from ours, but there is a lot of trauma associated with delving into the issues that you've delved into as a writer and we delve into as lawyers. And so I want to kind of ask each of you, and maybe this time we'll start with Michael and then Emma and Nikki, to tell us, what do you do? How do you maintain buoyancy? How do you maintain hope in the face of the grave injustice that we are all working in, and the indignity that our clients experience? What keeps you going?
Other than a shot of bourbon and a nice cigar every now and then, I'm inspired by people who've come before me. I'm inspired by those who have the ability to arrest their fears. My greatest hero is Harriet Tubman. I just can't understand that. I mean, that type of courage, to go in and out of, hell for the sake of others when you yourself was safe. And it's just, to me, that's the height of courage. And I think about people like her and others who make tremendous sacrifices in the face of enormous odds. I'm inspired by those people, and they're not just the famous ones. It's just so many unsung heroes. So I'm addicted to fairness and justice, and I despise those who serve as apologists for injustice, you know, because the world is what we make it. It's just that simple. And you know, so that's what keeps me going. It's about future generations. It's about what others did for us, you know, who fought fights before we even knew what fights were about, you know, and I think about it, you know, I think about our, you know, our ancestors and what they went through. And that's who I do it for. You know, I'm committed to playing my small part in changing the world, because the world, like, frankly, is so fucked up, excuse the French. I mean, but and it's people who make it that way. It's just ordinary people who are just, you know, basically evil. And we have to confront that, and we have to confront it at all costs. And I'm passionate about it, and I will go to the mat. And, you know, what I fear most is, you know, I don't want to lead folks to where they don't want to go. So I don't, you know, I tell clients all the time, you know, I'll go there. So if you're not willing to go there, don't go there, because we will go. And that's how, you know, my doctor said I had great blood pressure, you know what I mean? Because I release like that. I mean, I get down like that, and it's healthy for me. So that's how I stay sane in an insane world.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've picked a role or landed in a role where a lot of the nuance that I think Nikki has like painstakingly obviously worked incredibly hard to understand and convey, I sort of avoid by being in a role where it's so clear what I'm there for. I'm there as an advocate, and I'm there to give clients, I hope, a radically different experience of the legal system, to try to you know, now enable clients to benefit from being in the driver's seat, and to get the one limited thing, like, I think what makes it easier for me is the limits of my role. The only thing I'm allowed to get under the law is money, and it's not in any way perfect justice. But that's what's there. And my job is to come in and see these people, see these cops as evil. And I think there is evil in it's like banal evil, but it's always there. And to push and push and push until I can get the provable lies that will translate into dollars to hopefully make my clients' lives a little bit easier. And so the thing that struck me the first time that I sat down and talked to Nikki was that I was kind of saying, we're talking about Michael Quinn, who is Willoughby's partner, who played a big role in fabricating the false confession that he and Willoughby then attributed to Bobby, and putting him in this situation where he ended up taking this plea deal. And Nikki was sort of saying, but my understanding of him as a person, I've talked to all these people who knew him, and my understanding of him as a person is, how do you reconcile these things, in really trying to understand him as a whole person? And my kind of visceral reaction was like, why are you bothering with this? Like, the guy did this. It couldn't be more. And now he's lying about it. And he's going to work every day, and he's not thinking for 1 second about what he did. And you know, he did this over and over again in his career. So why are we trying to understand Michael Quinn? And of course, that's what a responsible and you know, talented writer does. You're trying to understand at a much deeper level than I think I, in my work, have to. And I find that comforting, because it allows me to show up and fight. And it allows me to see every deposition as a fight, as a piece in a puzzle that I'm trying to put together for this end that I hope in the end, you know, will help somebody who's gone through this. And I think only by like bringing it down to that individual level is what I think enables me to do it without I don't know. It's incredibly personal and painful work for sure, but that's how I do it.
I was, you know, I was pretty I mean, the level of immersion just seemed to me there wasn't any choice. You're either going to explain all the forces that contribute. I looked at this one moment where this terrible crime happened, and I wanted to explain everything that builds to a moment and how the moment expresses so much about the past, so much about the way people exist. And so I had to talk with incredible people, amazing people, so many people, and that was really inspiring. But it would be completely disingenuous of me not to say that I went to several prisons, sometimes in the company of, some of you know, Tracy Mears. She would come to me with me sometimes, as would a then Yale sociology professor, Andy Papachristos, because when we were talking to people who'd been convicted of murder and, you know, and I went to see Bobby over and over again until he was released. And there's just, listening to the things that put people into the situations that then lead to prison there's not a lot of happiness there. And it was upsetting. And I would feel the way you would expect. And the kink in it for me is that I felt like I didn't deserve to feel that way. I felt as though these were other people's lives, that it wasn't my life, and that I could go back to my own life, which was, you know, different and free, and also not, you know, sure, there had been, you know, troubles. Everybody has troubles. Couldn't compare in the least. And I guess I would, one of the things that got me I think it's upsetting to think about, because it really was, if you're going to inhabit the lives of other people, and you do a good enough job, you will feel everything. And I did at times get depressed, but I feel like I was really, I mean, when I came from the prison, it's like you with your bourbon and cigars. I found this ice cream place, and no matter what hour of the day, every time I left the prison after a while, I would go get a really big ice cream, just because I wanted some sweetness. And I felt that what was missing there more than anything was sweetness. And it made me kind of, you know, disconsolate. But again, I didn't feel like it was about me. And so I wanted to make those things go away. But the thing that really helped me keep going over all those years were friendships. And in this respect, people like Miriam and Mike, who would get phone calls from me, and Tracy, and my friend Clifton Watson. And I especially want to mention my friend Dwayne Betts, who some of you know, who the book is dedicated to. He talked to me every day for 8 years, sometimes more than that. And we were talking about all the things that friends talk about. But the generosity of friends was really, I think, and my family, helped me to do as good a job as I could. I felt deeply, deeply committed to this. And many people thought I was crazy. They lost track of what I was doing. What is this? You know, and I don't know. I just, you know, I think that's a great thing in life. If you can find something that you're committed to, so you don't even care what others think about what you're doing, you're just doing it, that's when you know you have the right profession. And I guess I would wish that for every student in this room.
Such a great note, I think, to end our formal, you know, part of the presentation on. I'll just add, my ways of coping are pretty basic. I eat, I sleep, I work out, I do yoga, I meditate, and I talk to my friends and family. And I work on teams. Teams are such an important buoy. It's so good to have colleagues that you can talk with, have macabre humor with, discharge with, share ideas with, cry with, feel bad with, and then celebrate the victories. And so I encourage all of you to take that very seriously as you embark on your work, whatever form that takes. Finally, we're going to open up to all of you for questions for our wonderful panelists. And so I don't know, Dana, how you want to handle the logistics around that. Yes, thank you so much.
All right, enthusiasm.
Yes.
Push the button's green, it will work.
I guess when y'all was speaking, I was thinking about the entanglement of violence and care, right? So
I can't hear you. Is his mic on?
When y'all was speaking, I was thinking about the entanglement of violence and care and violence, right? And I was thinking about the fact that a person that's arrested goes before the court, right? They are somewhat a particular, they're set against some universal quality, right? And their humanity is stripped away from them, right? So now when you go back to bring this person back into society or win a case for them, right? It's the same particular at play, but now you have to humanize them to appeal to the care of the judge or whoever has the power. But that care is the same, that the people that you're beckoning that care from are the same people that use the violence to situate this individual, right? And it's a presumed subject there, right? It's a subject that needs to be humanized. And then even when that person comes home, it's a gaze that watches over that presumed subject that creates a lot of the violence in our so-called enlightened society, right? So this enlightened subject is a presumption, right, that requires violence. And what I want to ask y'all is, how do you reconcile that violence with this presumption?
I mean, I can try to answer that question, which is I think I don't have really an answer to it. I think I'm really aware that I am working in a system that is it's not right to say it doesn't work. Like, of course it doesn't work. It just perpetuates this like large scale harm and doesn't do the things that it nominally is supposed to do. And I think, you know, I look at all the time talking about things that buoy you. I look at people who are doing much more radical work and who are doing much more, I think, brave and courageous work. And I'm very comfortable with where I am, and I'm confident it's where I should be and where I can actually help and also live a life that I find fulfilling and takes care of my family. And I think, but I don't think I can, there are a lot of things about the work and about working within the legal system that I don't think I can reconcile. And I feel it. I think this is what you're talking about. And I feel it at trial where I'm really in trust. These cases are really personal, and by the time you get to trial in a wrongful conviction case, you've been fighting for somebody for 6 or 7 years and really gotten to know them and feel it's really personal. And putting a client up on a witness stand in a federal courthouse to testify to a group of random people with lawyers for the cops who did this to them in the first place, getting ready to cross-examine them, it feels wrong. And it just feels asking for this like vulnerability and going back to the idea of trust, asking somebody who's been through this to trust me to guide them through a process in this courtroom that is designed to and has done all this harm to them, and knowing that I can't protect them, I can prepare them to testify, and I can do my best to do what I ought, which is to put the focus in the courtroom on the police officers and what they have done, the harm they've done, as opposed to, putting my client out there to just sit in judgment of have these people judge their character. But I mean, I kind of can't stop talking now that I've started, because it feels wrong and it feels kind of perverse. And I have a lot of questions about it.
Anyone else on the panel want to address that question?
I think what you're talking about is complexities that are difficult to work through and don't make sense, and yet are the things that confront what. Just from my position, I was confronted with many different people with many points of view on some of the things that you're talking about. And people were feeling it. I mean, even the words that you're using are so potent, right? And I noticed that maybe it was just my good fortune to encounter the right people, but you would be much aligned with so many people who I encountered. And it's not that there wasn't a whole spectrum of feelings about systems and a whole spectrum of feelings about how things worked and so forth. And for me, it was really, really important to try and understand how people understood how things worked, So one of the reasons that my project, for all the time it took, was so fulfilling is because I met many people who had many such questions. And I felt that part of my job was to, I mean, when you're writing a book, it's a little bit like taking a photograph, right? There's a whole world out there. There's an infinite onrush of people and moments and actions in every day for even somebody that you're writing about, all the minutes and the hours and the things that they see and think and feel. And so when you write a book, just like when you take a photograph, you're extracting something very small and trying to make it seem like a full whole. And I think it's guided by questions. And sometimes I think what you're implying, which I agree with, is that some of the answers aren't really answers, that there's ambiguity, there's ambivalence, there's confusion, there are things that conflict. And how, in creating a supposed whole, do you do that? And I hope that when I'm writing about things, that what I'm really doing is I'm expressing the ambiguity, the complication of any given subject, but also that it's something worth grappling with, worth engaging with.
I think to be clear is the idea also that a person that comes home from that, because I did 26 years and 7 months. Miriam was the lawyer that brought me home, right? When you come home from that, right, it's brothers that you left behind, sisters that you left behind. So you as the particular become the person that substantiates when you fall into the discourse that's asking you and beckoning you to perform in a certain kind of way to validate your existence, right? So when you validating that existence through that performance, it's a denial and devaluation of the brothers and sisters that you left behind.
Yeah, so Clyde was a clinic client and is a thought partner in the clinic. In fact, we're going to teach class in 20 minutes. And one of the things that we thought about a lot is because, you know, Clyde and some of our other clients are in many respects extraordinary people. Clyde earned, is it okay if I share a little bit? Clyde earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy from Wesleyan while he was incarcerated. And we managed to get him out on his 50th birthday, the day before he walked across the stage at Wesleyan in his regalia to collect his bachelor's that he earned under the toughest of circumstances. And so in many respects, you know, Clyde was extraordinary. And yet I do think a lot about the millions of brilliant people that we incarcerate whose potential is lost. And so we have clients who manifest in ways that are cognizable by our society, their talent. And we have many clients who never get that opportunity and never get that chance. And that's, I think, part of what you're talking about. And, you know, people would say, you know, I can't even tell you, like, I would walk into rooms, people who knew the program that Clyde helped start at Connecticut at Cheshire. And they'd say, are you going to help us get Clyde out? We need to get Clyde out. Clyde needs to get out. And so Dwayne actually introduced us to each other, Dwayne Betts. And so in a lot of respects, Clyde never asked for help. We asked him if he wanted us to help him. And in some respects, it's the innocent clients too, right? Like these people who exemplify the injustice, the wrongfulness of what we do. And yet I worry sometimes about setting those narratives forth because we detract from the almost mundane reality of injustice that affects people who don't get to earn their bachelor's degree, or who weren't wrongfully convicted in the sense that, yes, they committed a crime, but you know, who all knows what went into the actual conviction that resulted in them getting locked up. And so I worry a little bit. I don't know. I don't want to like co-opt what you're saying, but I wonder if that might be part of the thread that you're talking about.
The union is the only time the ideal of the union that have never been part of the union is slavery, still outside of that. And now for you to use a narrative of being union for me to get killed. So all the other people are still designated not a union because of the act that they did or did not do, just because they're situated in the.
Yeah, and what it takes, back to one of the earliest points that Michael made on the panel, what does it take to humanize people? What do we have to show to humanize people who are dehumanized, you know, historically, and of course in the criminal legal system disproportionately now? Stuff that it's a really powerful question to think about. One thing I just want to say too, Nikki, and I know we talked about this, The only person that I felt was kind of flat in the book was Quinn. And I remember you telling me that Quinn was like the only person you didn't talk to, right? Or who wouldn't talk to you. He wouldn't talk to you. Even Willoughby, Bobby would call him Willoughby. You, because of your deep humanity, were able to make him a three-dimensional, you know, not a likable guy, but you could kind of see where he was coming from. Back to your point, Emma, about, you know, Nikki doing his best to try to humanize people. And Quinn was the only one, the one who refused to talk to you is the only one that I feel didn't get that treatment. So I want to just say that too, in terms of thinking about, you know, a journalist's role and being different from an advocate's role, the way Emma described. Does anyone else have any questions? Oh, we do have 2 more questions. Great. Let's maybe we could get both questions together, or 3 questions. Let's get all, maybe Dana, is that okay? Can we get all the questions? And then, because we're almost out of time.
Okay, I'll be brief, but I work in reentry as the director of reentry for the city of Bridgeport and work in reentry at the roundtable here in City of New Haven. And the thing that I always find interesting is as much work that's being done by individuals that have come out from being in prison and people in the community, it's still just a lack of understanding or a lack of awareness about the need for resources for this population that are coming out. Because 90% of these people are coming home. And I don't understand what the rest of the world doesn't get about the need to not have them marked with a scarlet letter, provide them resources that they need, whether it's IDs, whether it's housing. And again, these are issues that are impacting the general population, but it's really exacerbated with the reentry population around housing, around the gulf in wealth and health equity, continuity of care. You have a higher morbidity and mortality rate for these individuals that are coming out. And the fact that we have to fight so hard to humanize people that are human. I mean, you can visibly see these people are human. Whether they made a mistake once upon a time in their life, regardless of what it is, they're coming home. We want to increase public safety. You want to reduce recidivism, but at the same time, we have to fight so hard just to get the bare minimum of resources. Makes absolutely no sense. So I guess my question is, how do we go about a campaign of awareness and galvanizing that for the people, for the powers that be? And it also includes engaging the community so that they're politically aware and understand the powers that they have to go up to the state capitol. Because, you know, we've done things at the state capitol, and the first time we did a day of dignity at the state capitol, we got like 270 people up there. Out of that 270 people, maybe 80% had never been to the state capitol or understood where, you know, power is wielded in their name.
The other people who had their hands up.
Thank you. My question is, first of all, I enjoyed all of you. Thank you so much. A lot of these times when people, law enforcement, have basically framed a person, it's been proven that they wrongfully arrested a person, they get fired, and then quietly they get rehired, get a pension, and retire or go back onto the job. Kind of what type of things are happening? I know unions exist, but when a person is wrongfully arrested an individual and it's proven, it's kind of hard to stomach as a Black male that this person turns around and gets to keep their job. One guy was fired, and then about a year later, he was rehired long enough to put his pension in so he could retire. So he killed an innocent person and he gets a pension, and that person's family doesn't have their loved one. So what are some things that, if you know of, that are kind of happening to kind of put a dent in that type of thing where these people are not on the backside being rewarded for injustice?
There was a hand over here.
There's time. You can both ask your question.
Sorry, my question is really brief, but I just wanted to ask, I feel like a lot of times this kind of work can feel hopeless in a lot of ways. And I just wanted to ask, you know, what kind of things you all have hope about while doing this work on a daily basis in your respective ways.
What was that?
Jasper, we didn't quite hear the whole
Oh, sorry, should I ask again? I just wanted to ask, a lot of times this kind of work, I feel like can be hopeless or can feel hopeless while you're doing it. And I want to ask the kind of, the things that you all have hope about and things you feel hopeful about moving forward that keep you going.
So there's going to be 2 more questions here and 1 more. And
Awesome. My question is for Nicholas. I understand you've had a very prolific writing career prior to this. And I'm curious what you had to learn to be able to write this book right now.
Great. And then
Is there one more question?
I thought there was, yeah. No?
Was there?
There was one through-
Okay, I'm gonna, like, we have about a minute, 2 minutes, so I'm gonna say, Emma, can you answer the question about the systemic, stuff around folks keeping their
Obviously do
pensions?
bad things and keep
Yeah,
their pensions.
yeah. And then maybe we'll let Nikki answer the last question about the book, which is a much longer conversation, and I encourage you all to keep talking. Yeah.
So I think most often nothing happens to the individual officers at all, rarely fired, even where they're proven civil rights violations against them. It's I think the movement to curtail or end qualified immunity is one of the best things that's going on right now in my view. I think the other thing I was going to say is I think it's not a bad, I don't think this, I know this isn't what you're suggesting, but it's not a bad apple problem, right? And police departments are so quick to say, oh, we had no idea. Oh, it's this rogue officer. Oh, this person, it's a Willoughby problem. It's not a Willoughby problem. It's a Quinn problem. Willoughby, I think Willoughby is a kind of fascinating sociopath, but there aren't that many cops like that. There are some, and they reveal themselves, but it's all of the Michael Quinns who are just bumbling around, cutting corners, breaking rules, and comfortably lying under oath again and again and again, who are perpetuating this problem. And I think the problem is with police administrators and police departments that don't do anything to try to change a culture in which police officers routinely lie to put people in prison. And I think that's the biggest thing that should happen. And so I think it's almost the fact that there aren't more consequences for individual officers. There should be, but I almost don't think that's the point.
Miriam, could I quickly address Earl's question and then turn it over to Nikki?
Sure. And then
Bottom line, a lot of people just don't care about the reentry population. They just don't care. And I think that's why it's important for Black males in particular to become more involved in the electoral process. And because voting matters. It's just that simple. It's an old cliche, but that's how you get what you want in a democratic society. And I think we just don't take it seriously enough. And that's really, I think, the answer.
And it's also, white people have to look too. I know I don't mean to just be reductionist about it, but I also think it's so easy for so many white people in particular to just look away and not pay attention to what's happening in the consequences of mass incarceration.
So I'm going to jump in here. It is 2:00 and we must leave the room because there are some other folks coming in to use the room for a class. So I just want to thank all of you. I'm sorry to cut off the questions. And I want to thank our panelists. And if Nicholas is amenable to signing books, then we can go to the student lounge and you can have your book signed.